Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here again with us today. So our speaker today is from the Islam religion, and his name is Erschen. Did I say that correctly?
Right. Yeah.
Perfect. He actually is here in Janesville. There's a Muslim Dawah circle, and that is where he is joining us from today. So thank you so much
Absolutely.
for joining us.
Yeah.
If you did not hear my little speak about the white papers in the back when you first walk in, those are for my benefit. You can take a moment afterwards to fill them out if you haven't already. It's for my benefit to know if there's interest to continue some of these education programs this summer. So if you wouldn't mind leaving those on the table when you go, I don't need your name. If there's something you want me to know or have a suggestion that's not a question, feel free to write that on there as well. Okay? And for people listening at home, if you're interested in filling out one of these, call the office and speak with Jeannie or myself, and we can take care of that. Okay? So I'm handing it over to you.
Okay. So I'll begin with A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. That means I seek refuge with God from the accursed enemy of mankind, Satan, and in the name of God, all merciful, most merciful. So that's kind of the beginning for many of our adventures when we start something out. So myself, I'm Salih Erschen. I actually grew up in southwest Wisconsin. I was born in Dubuque, Iowa, and then I was raised on the good side of the river. So, but grew up about a mile and a half from the Mississippi, and that was my stomping grounds. In a time when we knew all of our neighbors, and all of our neighbors knew us, and sometimes that was to our advantage as kids, and sometimes not, because we were throwing rocks at the wrong thing or whatever. My parents would know about it before we got back. So, but that's the environment that I grew up in, and I was raised Catholic, and I was the child in the family who actually asked questions and cared about my faith journey, and that annoyed my mom quite a bit because she felt like she had a real challenge on her hands, and probably still does actually. So the things that I had most questions about, though, was what I perceived as kind of inconsistencies, and one of the biggest pieces for me was about the oneness of God. And so when I was being raised in the church, and I'd go, we'd have classes every day. I actually was in private school, so we had that as a part of our daily education. The notion of God being who he is and always will be as he is, that to me made sense as a 10-year-old, growing up. And then later when other ideas, especially about Trinity, came in, I would say, how is that consistent with God being as he was and always shall be as he was? And that, I didn't know it, but as a 10-year-old asking that question to the priest, it wasn't received well somehow. And in fact, I was told on to my parents about that, and then that from that point forward, they kind of put me in touch with a nun in the family, so that she could kind of help, steer me in the right direction. And the thing is that I was genuine in these questions. And I'm an adult now. We have my wife and I raised 6 children, and the youngest of our children right now is 12 years old, and she's asking all kinds of questions that, as parents, we're like, gosh, why does she keep asking these kinds of questions? And I said to my wife the other day, it reminds me of me. Like when I wonder if I was this much of a handful to my parents or what. But all of this kind of led me to keep my mind open, essentially. And so I kept wanting to be part of a faith-based community and everything like that. But as I became a young adult, there was also, being raised in a secular society and things like that, I started to even, toy with the notion atheism and things like that. And none of that ever really set with me, because I always felt like there is a God. I just have to get it right, my understanding right. So all of that, when I was 20 years old, I left from, actually I was doing a casino boat job in Dubuque, Iowa. And it closed up, and they sold it to a company down south. So all my life I had a dream to become a famous actor. So now I'm 20 years old, and I said to my parents, like, I did college for a couple of years, and it wasn't sitting right for me there, but I just wanted to pursue this dream. And so the boat closes, I go visit some friends in Madison, and then with the intention to go down and see where the boat goes, to get it in its place and see it in its new home, and then I was going to go out west and become a famous actor. So that was a 20-year-old plan. And God had another plan for me, though. I went to Madison. I ended up running into the lady that would become my wife, actually. And I, of course, didn't know it at the time. But when I met her, she was a very unique individual. She was from Somalia. And when I first started to approach her, she was very modest, and she wouldn't allow for me to just come visit her and things like that. We'd talk on the phone a lot. We lived in the same apartment building, and initially when I was able to talk to her, she was coming home from work, and she was getting into the elevator, and I came and put my foot in the door. And she was pretty intimidated, but she did give me her phone number, so we probably just to get me out of her way, but it was the actual right phone number, so that led to good things. And we would talk on the phone a lot, and what we discovered was, I was born and raised in Southwest Wisconsin, but from a big family, and she was also raised from a big family. So we shared a lot of stories that were about big families and eating together, and just kind of a wholesome family background, and those were really bonding elements for the two of us. And finally, I talked her into taking a walk in public with each other and stuff. And when we did, I had said, why was it so hard to get you to even go for a walk out in public or whatever? She's like, because she was right up front. She said, because I'm a Muslim and I have to marry a Muslim man. I said, well, that sounds like a rule. Where's a rule like that come from? And she said, the Quran. And I'm like, well, what is that? And then she said, well, you have the Bible. The Quran is like the Bible for us. And I said, okay, I've never heard of that before. But, in my spiritual journey to this point, I had read all kinds of different books about Taoism and things like that. And it kind of looked, beyond beyond at least the Catholic realm. I'd looked into other faith-based, even Christian faith-based groups and stuff. But I'd never heard of the Quran, and vaguely heard about Muslims, mostly with headline stories and things like that would paint it in a kind of scary picture. But I was left with this kind of new opening. So I followed through still with my intention to go down and see the boat, and I still had the intention actually to go out west, but having met Yasmin and then go down south, I actually went to a bookstore. At that point, I was on my own for the first time. I had gone down there. Originally, I was going to go with some buddies, but they said they weren't going to go, so I went by myself. And I had everything that I owned in the back of a Dodge Horizon, which is almost like a VW bug in size. So everything that I owned in life was in that car, and I went down there with no place really to go. And when I went to New Orleans, I actually drove in across all those long bridges, and then the first 2 or 3 blocks I went in, I looked to the left, and I saw a whole block of people living in boxes. And I was like, this is for real. I don't want to end up there. So I actually turned around and left the city right away, because I was like, I don't know where I'm going, but I don't want to end up there. So I left and I went across the river. I ended up in that period of time, it was around, I was down there for a month and a half, and in that period of time, I stayed in touch with Yasmin. I went to a local bookstore, bought a Quran. I started reading the Bible for the first time. I was raised with stories from the Bible, and we, go to classes and hear stories, but I never read it, myself. And so this was like a huge thing of exploration for me. It's a meaningful kind of spiritual journey, and in that was this element that I didn't know of or foresee, was this Quran. But reading the Quran and the Bible for me at the time was like amazing, because I was thinking, they're so similar. There's a lot of similar stories here, and they're like, the details even are very much the same. And I thought, is it possible after all of these like thousands of years that people from Islam and people from Christianity never realized that they're so close to each other? Am I the first to discover that? I'm thinking, but the reality is, of course, many people have seen those parallels, and some, when they see them, make decisions to try to still create a divide, and others, when they see them, see the area for it to be even more closely understood, that these are parallel tracks, and so that was the experience that really, in that as well, what I can say is, I was looking for the most clear definition of what is God. And in the Bible, what I found was God is love. And I thought to myself, boy, that makes a lot of sense. Because that's the most succinct, ongoing thing that you have from childhood to adulthood, is the experience of love. And I was also reading a book by Leo Buscaglia called The Book of Love. So those things went together really well for me. And then, having the Quran as a part of this journey and seeing that there was so much parallel, I was thinking, well, what's the difference? And what I discovered about the difference is that in Islam and throughout the Quran, there's no part of the Quran that ever becomes, it doesn't ever entangle the oneness of God. It's always about the oneness of God. And what I realized from my journey in Christianity was that was where my question came, is how can the oneness of God become this Trinitarian thing? And that's really where the answer came for me. Basically I was at that point really strongly considering, I think I might become a Muslim. I was already kind of strongly considering that. And I stayed in touch with Yasmin. And I thought to myself, my second dream throughout life was always that I wanted to be the father of a household. My mom used to say, why don't you become a priest? And I said, in the Catholic faith at least, you wouldn't be able to have a wife. So I would say to her, I want to have a wife, and I want to be the father of a household and have children and these kinds of things. And so all of that kind of shored up, that experience shored up into me coming back to Madison, and then 9 months later I gave my Shahada, the testimony of faith, and did my marriage with my wife, and I didn't know really, what was I doing? I mean, I'm still just 21 years old at that time, and making big decisions for myself, but not really knowing how the effect of this is going to come about. And one of the recurring experiences that I've had on this journey is to say to myself, how did you get here? What in the world is going on, And I had the opportunity to go to the Kaaba the Kaaba is it's actually a biblical reference as well, but it's the place where Abraham had built this building, and him and his son together built that place. That structure is still there, and so I had the opportunity to go there, and that was the daunting reality. Was I was thinking, how did I get here, and still over and over again, the travels that I've had through the world, and the people that I've met, all of this I feel like is a part of this spiritual journey that I've been on, and even being here today, so I see these as blessings, and it's all been possible because I made a choice to become a part of this, take on this path of self-submission. So that brings us to what is Islam? Like, what really is it all about? And there's a story that I often share that's a part of the teaching of Islam that basically tells a lot of the components. So it's a one story that tells all the components, and then after that we can kind of get into other nitty-gritty, if you will. But this story starts out with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He's traveling with his companions, and they're out in the middle of the desert, and they can see from the distance a traveler coming towards them. And they, being kind of like desert Bedouin kinds of people, they have this art of like sizing up, somebody coming from a distance, like what kind of horse are they on, or camel, or what kind of clothes are they wearing, what type of what tribe they're from, that kind of thing. So they're trying to figure out, like, who is this guy? Where's he coming from? What's he about? Well, he approaches quickly. He comes in and he's wearing full white garments that look like he hadn't traveled even from the distance that they saw him. And then they're thinking, what's going on here? And the guy comes and he sits right in front of the Prophet, and he takes his thighs and he says, "Tell me, Muhammad, what is Islam?" And the companions are like, what is this? Do we have to like wrestle this guy or what? Because he's coming in pretty hard, And then he's saying, like demanding, "Tell me, what is Islam?" So the Prophet, peace be upon him, is completely calm about it, and he says, "Islam is to give the testimony of faith that there is only one God and that I am his messenger. And Islam is to pray your 5 daily prayers. Islam is to go to the Kaaba once in a lifetime, if possible. It is to pay your zakah, and it is to fast the month of Ramadan." So he lists these 5 things, and then, that's Islam. And so that was his answer, and the guy says, "You are correct." And again, the Sahabas are like, what? His friends, companions are like, that's like not a typical thing to say to him. We're all asking him questions. He's teaching us. And he says, "You are correct." So he says, "Now tell me, what is Iman?" And this is it's like an Arabic word. It's usually translated as belief or faith. I think the most accurate translation would be acceptance. And so he says, again, the acceptance of the oneness of God. He's answering him. Acceptance of all of the revealed books, the acceptance of all the prophets, the acceptance of the unseen, the angels and the Satans and things of that nature. But the acceptance of the decree, the good and the bad of it, and the acceptance of the day of judgment, and the scale that will come with it. And he says again, "You are correct." And like the companions are still like, "Wow, this is amazing! Like, what's going on here?" And then he says, "Now tell me, Muhammad, what is ihsan?" And the best way to define ihsan is the way that he answered, because he said, ihsan is to worship God as though you see him, and even though you don't, you know that he sees you. And he asks him a few questions about the final days, and then he gets up and he leaves. And the companions are like, "What just happened?" To the Prophet. And the Prophet said, "That was the angel Gabriel, and he came today to teach you your faith." So in this story, it has all of the elements of what the faith and the practice of Islam is really about. So we have the 5 pillars that we give the Shahada at least once in a lifetime, but you actually do it over and over again in your life, which is La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. There's only one God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. And then you do your salah, your prayers, you pay your almsgiving with zakat, and then you fast the Ramadan, which we just ended up finishing. And the beautiful thing about Ramadan too is it says in the Quran, "Fast as those who have fasted before you." And when I saw that, I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." So I started to look back into like the traditional way, because I was raised Catholic and stuff, and Lent is a big part of that. But Lent always would kind of become easier and easier, I guess. And I thought, well, what did they used to do? And it was described, the way it was described, the fasting was similar to the fasting that we do as Muslims, and that is from sunrise to sunset, we don't eat or drink for 29 to 30 days. And so that's the fast of Ramadan. And then the Hajj is the journey to the Kaaba, once in a lifetime if possible. And in that, my wife and I have been talking about trying to make that journey for a long time now, but the curious situation that is happening right now is that there's a large fee to be able to go there right now. So it's going to be a while before we'll be able to afford to go. But the thing is, you don't have to do it if you can't afford it. So it's not like we're missing out on an obligation or something like that. But it is a very interesting journey to make, and it can be life changing, really. But some of the points of belief in this narration that describes the oneness of God, that's the primal piece of what Islam is truly about, is acknowledging over and over again in so many various ways that God is one. And then all of the prophets, that we believe in all of the prophets. So from stories of Adam, including Jesus, and Noah, and Moses, and all of these, this is a part of Islam, is to accept all of them. And in fact, in the Quran it says don't discriminate between them. Like, don't try to put one above the other. Their lessons are equal for us to take from. So it's not like one is more important. Although there are references that God makes in the Revelation that says about Abraham, he calls him the Khalil Allah, which means the friend of God. So he has, each one of them kind of have their own references. Like Jesus was referred to as the healer, and many of his miracles were about healing and things like that. So belief in all the prophets, all the books, all the revelations. So that's for us as Muslims, we totally accept that the Torah and the Injil, the Gospels and things like that are revelation from God. But we know as well, though, that they have been inherited by human beings and then sometimes kept well and sometimes not. And so some of them are lost completely, and translations from a language to another language, there's some things that can be lost there. And so there's the difficulty with knowing whether or not you have exactly what you need. And then with the Quran, which is beautiful, is that it's in Arabic. It is the way it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and it has, certain rules to it that would keep it intact that way. It's like the way that it's recited and things like that. You can tell if something is missing. So it's interesting because it's said that it'll be preserved to the end of time. So that's and just to give you an experience of hearing the Quran in Arabic, I'll do one of the short surahs. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. So that's you can hear kind of a melodic tone to it. When some people who are really good at reciting Quran, when they recite it, it's like they're singing a song. And in this particular verses, it says, Kul, say, Allahu ahad, Kul hu Allahu ahad, that God is one. Say that God is one. Kul hu Allahu samad. And say that he is as-samad, the eternally self-efficient. That God is the eternally self-efficient. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. He begets not, nor is he begotten. Wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad. And there is absolutely nothing like him. So this is a verse or a whole chapter. It's kind of short, but it tells us succinctly the reality of God's oneness. And it's called Suratul Ikhlas, which means that's enough, it's clear. So, having come to this part of my journey where I was asking myself, what's the difference? This is what I found to be the biggest difference, is that the focus in Islam was always about the clarity of the oneness of God. And to me, that made a lot of sense. So, I have enjoyed the journey of taking on Islam. And then being in Madison, Wisconsin, that's where my wife and I were based to begin our family, having children and things like that. And remember, I had the intention to become a famous actor. Well, the manifestation of that for me was that I ended up doing a community access TV show in Madison for over about a decade, actually. But it was all about, in having the experience of kind of trying to explain my faith practice and understanding to my family, I saw the difficulty that they were having in it wasn't maybe understanding, it could have been maybe more listening, but in the end, just not accepting. And so I thought, I should do what I can to try to reach out to my people, and so this was a live TV show, and it would allow for people to call in and ask questions. And for me, it was a wonderful tool for learning more, because when people would ask questions, they would ask questions that I might not have asked myself. And then I would go and study those things and then come back and try to do the answer to it, So it was a learning journey for me as well. And so over the years, essentially, those types of efforts, I just tried to make myself available as much as possible to be able to do these kinds of interactions with people, to be able to explain, really what is Islam about, because, there's a lot of mystique that has been built up over the years. And I'm not talking even just the most recent years, like there's Orientalist academics that have been doing this for ages. They'd go into what they call the East, they'd come back with their academic stories of what that's all about. And they would tell inaccurate stories because a part of the faith practice, any faith practice, is that it's hard to explain the flavor of honey. The only way to know is to do it. And so, trying to explain what it's like to do the prayer of the Muslim. For an outsider to watch that be done, and then go and write a book about it when they go back to college, they're going to tell a story of what they saw, but they're not going to know the experience of having put themselves into the position of submission, So that's a bit of a situation that would cause a gap over the years. And some of the other things that I experienced, because I'm an American and I took on Islam, a lot of times I look at the general story of Islam in America, and the perception often is either it's a foreign thing or it's a black thing. Those are the two, you got black Muslims and then you got foreigners. And I'm like, well, where do I fit in that, guys? Because I'm a Muslim as much as any of them, and I'm from here, and I do that, So, so over the years, I've enjoyed to be able to have interactions with people and allow for the questions to be asked. And I'm coming from the Midwest and the same background, and I have an understanding of what it's like to be from here, and then to take on this faith practice that is largely misunderstood. So I'll leave it at that for now, because I'm hoping that Jen told me that you guys ask awesome questions, and I'm sure that'll take us into great places. And she also has said, make sure you use the mic.
Did I see someone's hand?
Sorry.
No, why are you
I
sorry?
have a million questions.
That's how we learn, that's good.
So would you say that the word iman, it kind of translates into faith?
Yeah, often that's exactly how they translate it. But I like to take it to the other level of acceptance, because it's not just believing in it, it's, you know, like to say that you believe in an angel, there's no way scientifically that you're necessarily gonna be able to prove that. But it's also not just a leap of faith, because there are many things that affirm that there are angels around, due to the
Okay,
things
so
that they
you
do.
would say acceptance was a little bit
Yeah,
closer
that's how I feel about
than
it.
faith.
Yeah.
Okay, and Kaaba must mean Mecca?
Kaaba is actually that house, it's a square building that's in the middle of Mecca.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. And then I wanted to know, why are men and women separated during services?
Yeah, that was a good, that was a big question I had at the very beginning, because I, came into the faith, with a bit more of a liberal, idea of those things. And then, the biggest, part of the reason is, that when we go to pray together, your intention to be there is to pray. So, being in your own place for that allows for you to make that connection individually and not to be distracted. So I always think of, if I would go to church with my wife, which we've done before, we had that experience and being with the family and stuff, but you're sitting next to each other, and you have the tendency to go, when we leave, we gotta go to the grocery store, right? Something like that, So the distraction is there, yeah. So that's part of it, but then I also realized, because I had to really think about this, how is this natural or whatever, But I thought to myself, as I was being raised, through the years, we go to family picnics, and inevitably throughout the day, the men would end up in one part of the park and the ladies were in another part. They had things they'd talk about and be laughing about, and the guys would be doing their own thing. So I thought to myself, well, it's actually kind of natural. It just happens that way,
Are men and women considered equal?
Yes, it's spiritually with the law.
Okay.
So, but technically, in the social structure, it's said that men are supposed to take the responsibility to provide for their home. And for the woman, she can provide into the home as well, but it's considered for her to do that like she's doing charity. So she's helping out. And she's getting blessings from God for doing that as well. So it's his obligation, and it's her, support. She's doing it as an extra piece.
Okay, it just seems, kind of separate if a woman can't go out alone.
Right.
She has to be covered.
Yeah, so there are all these kinds of pieces, and some of them, what I've learned over the years, are more so what I call cultural, and some of them are actual faith-based. So the covering, there are parts of the Quran that say to dress modestly, and cover your adornments. So, when the woman goes home, she can be completely naked and walk around the house, and in the house, and that the adornments that she has are for her husband. It's for him to be able to know how beautiful she is in that way. But it's not encouraged for her to go out and to share that with the world. So modesty is what is actually mentioned. And then the thing of so there are things that I've learned about Muslim countries in the application of Islam that aren't Islamic, they're cultural. And so to say that women can't go to school is wrong. It's not Islamic. And I'm happy to be the first to stand forward to say that. I would say that to any Saudi or whatever, And I've met actually a Muslim woman from California who had converted to Islam and stuff, and she actually was a really strong advocate, and she would go to those countries and tell them how wrong they were. It was pretty awesome, So these kinds of things happen. There's also stories of I've heard in Turkey. There's a Muslim woman from the Madison area actually, and she took on wearing the hijab, and she would go back with her husband to Turkey, and the people there have been, for 100 years in more of a secular society, and there's a lot of discouraging to wear the hijab in public and things like that. So she would go there from America wearing the hijab, and they'd be like, "What's wrong with you? You don't have to do that." And she's like, "No, this is my faith, bro. Back off." So she had to like advocate to be able to do that, and the family that she was with would always like tell her, nah, don't do it, you know, it's okay. And so there's a lot of these kinds of nuances that are really quite interesting within the whole piece. But then there's also like degrees of what people wear. So there's the burqa thing that covers the face. And you know, to that, like the prophets' wives would do that, and partly because they just didn't want to be like glorified more. So they tried to like hide themselves from the people. So there's reasons why people would do certain things, but there's also cultures out there who that's the way they wore it before even Islam came. You know, they wore this. The other thing with the hijab, and you know, I've made this point to my family often, because a couple of my sisters had some difficulty with my wife taking the hijab on, because like when we first met each other, she wasn't wearing it, and then she started wearing it later, and my sisters became upset about it, and they like caused some difficulty for that, and so basically, you know, Yasmin had to advocate for, this is the way I wear, and I made the point. If you look at any of the pictures, I don't know if there's any depictions of Mary around here. Typically, if you see any, she has the hijab on. She wears the cover, and also we're you know, raised in a Catholic family with a nun. The habit is like, you know, and I can remember as a child, if I'd go to a McDonald's or something and there was nuns there, I'd sit straight, man. I wasn't gonna, you know, but you respect it because they're people of a cloth, you know. And so that's the type of reality that there is for the Muslim woman when she wears her thing. It's a spiritual decision to do that, and she's doing it for a reason of modesty and protecting her beauty and things like that. So there's a lot of really deep wisdom behind it. But again, these are things that are culturally toyed with, essentially. You know, there's a lot of stories, like in France, they would pass laws in the government to say that women can't wear it. And it's like, what the heck kind of a culture is that, you know? Or even you know, ladies would wear, I forget, they call them burkinis or something like that or whatever, but it's like a full cover for being able to go swimming. I mean, come on. You're going to tell the lady, no, you can't wear that, and so you can't go swimming. It's like, come on. She just wants to go swimming, and she wants to dress modestly. What's the problem with that? And so there really isn't a problem, but you know, as human beings, we create problems for ourselves a lot of times. And then, you know, through the going back and forth of, this should be done, this shouldn't be done. I like this, I don't like that. And, you know, a cult of personality and things like that. We stir these kinds of notions up within ourselves, and you get down to it and you understand it, and you're like, that's fine. If she wants to do that, then why wouldn't she do it? My teacher that I found in this spiritual journey, he was being interviewed on the radio one time or something, and they were trying to like get him in the corner and be like, you know, do all women have to wear hijab then? And his answer, because he's a kind of a witty fella, he said, no, not all women have to wear it. Only the beautiful ones.
I have one more question, or it's not a question. Well, it is. From what I've read of, you know, many religions, and I try to tie it up in my head so it makes sense, and I see God or a higher power is like the tree trunk, and then all these different religions have gone off from that. And their goal is the same, but they look at it differently and they act differently. And as you said, like in different cultures, they're gonna show it differently.
Yeah.
Do you reconcile with that?
So yeah, the way that I look at it is the story of the human being, and that is, like, if you take it from the perspective of Adam all the way through, there were many prophets that came. In the Quran it says there were maybe 124,000 prophets. There was prophets that came to every nation. So if that's the case, throughout time, there's always this message comes to a people in this period of time, and they practice it there, and then a generation, 2 generations, 3 generations come, and this generation can only remember what their grandparents talked about of this thing before. They don't know the practices anymore. And this happens over and over again. And then, so the remaining of the faith practice that those people had becomes a legend, you know. And then it's necessary for another prophet to come and to re-evaluate those things, and sometimes another revelation to bring maybe sometimes new parameters of what's good and bad for human beings. And then that's going to be used in practice for a period of time. And then, so we live in a time when we've inherited knowledge about the Torah and the Gospel and the Book of David. And so we have a lot of knowledge of the human story, and we can see branches of that going off. So if I look at Hinduism and I look at Taoism and all these things, in the core of that, in Madison, in doing interfaith work, I knew this guy who was a Buddhist, or a Hindu. He was a Hindu. And we had known each other for 2-3 years or whatever, and we'd seen each other at a lot of these different events. And so we were together at our center there, and he said, Salih, I wanted to tell you, do you know that like all of our deities come from one deity? I'm like, man, come on, you gotta be kidding me. Like, that's profound. That's a profound thing to know. And then, like, because that shows you what human beings are capable of. First of all, the message or the one God element is there, but, you know, then human beings have we can make gods out of anything if we want to, you know. And but we have to know that about ourselves as human beings. That's part of what Islam teaches us, is we have to know those things about us, that we don't fall into those traps. Because that's one of the things that our inveterate foe, Satan, who has declared to pull us off of the path until the end of time, he's taken that role and that challenge to try to make human beings go astray. One of the tools that he uses is to try to redirect us and our attention towards something else other than God. And he knows that there's one God, but he knows he's wanting to try to take us off of that path. So we see the remains of that in all of these different faith practices. But if you go to the core of it, you're going to find that there was a message of oneness there. And then human beings do what they do, and you see the burgeoning of different stories throughout history. So all of those, I mean, we live in a very rich time of lots of different stories of the human being. In the Quran it says to get to know one another. It says that we should get to know one another. And by doing that, you're going to find these stories and where they merge and how they came apart. And you know, hopefully if we do it well, we'll be able to navigate ourselves in the most proper ways. Yeah.
I have a question too. You've been here, what, 10 years?
Yeah, about 10 years now in Janesville. Yeah.
Why? I mean,
How did we get here?
I know your wife was an aerobics instructor, and
Yeah,
you know,
exactly,
that's how
yeah.
I kind of
Yeah.
first met you. But
So we so this is a kind of an interesting story. So we were raising a family in the Madison area and stuff like that. We actually also throughout the years we're still doing it. We have an adult family home. It's like when we first started out together and raising our families and stuff, we actually would live in an adult family home and take care of adults there with needs while we were raising our children. But later on, we ended up putting that facility into a duplex, and then my wife's mother came to visit, and she then started to become the manager of that while we were in the distance. So the interesting part of what happened was we're growing a family, and we had the want and the desire to have the American dream of our own home and things like that, so our kids could grow up and, you know, and in their own yard and stuff like that, have these experiences. But in Islam, it's very strongly, there's a message in Islam that is in other faiths. This is a interfaith reality, is that riba, or interest, is considered completely unacceptable. So interest is the most common, prolific economic, you know, tool out there in the whole world today. And in Islam, we're not supposed to participate in it. And I said, well, even in, I go, well, that's Islam. You go into the Bible, and even look at the story of Jesus, actually. This is one of the stories I love about Jesus. Is he goes into the temple, and he sees these guys doing this changing of the, they're defiling the temple. And he throws the tables over it like in a rebellious revolt against what they're doing. Well, what they were doing is this changing of money, the practice of riba, or interest. Usury, actually, is the more common Old English word, usury. And usury is something that in every good society was always forbidden, even in secular societies, and even in Greek societies before Christianity. So so this is something that is a prohibition, and even it was prohibited until like the 1800s within Christianity, and then finally, the people who practiced this thing would keep putting pressure on until finally it was said a little bit is okay. And from there, the floodgates opened up until now, which I say that is one of the greatest oppressions of the whole world, actually. And so we're a young couple. We want to buy a house. How do you do that without interest, without a bank, right? So it ends up, I had a memory from when I was a kid, and my grandparents had a steakhouse that they had sold on a land contract. And then I thought, well, what is a land contract? So I started looking into that. And then we ended up finding a place in Beloit where the family, may God bless them, I think part of it was just that they saw that here's this young couple and want to help them. But they had inherited their parents' home, and they already had their own home. So they were willing to sell that place to us on a land contract, no banks or nothing, no interest. And so we ended up moving to Beloit. Well, I think we were there 3 or 4 years, and we had done everything we could to pay that place off. And we had like 3 or 4 months to pay it completely off. So we put a lot into it. And then the city was building a school. So if you drive into Beloit now, you see that huge school on Milwaukee Street there, brand new school. That's where we used to live, actually, right between there and a big church that's there. So the city had come to us right away, and they said, we don't have to have your property to build this, but if you want to sell, let us know. And we kind of waited it all out because there were some neighbors that they had to do eminent domain on and stuff like that. We stayed out of all that. And at the very end, we were like, well, what would you offer, And then they gave us a decent offer, and we were able to pay off the house and then invest in a place here. So the place here came up, which was a beautiful thing. It was a foreclosure. There's a wonderful property with 3 acres of land and stuff. It was great for our children, and a huge house, but it had a hole in the roof that we had to deal with right away. But so we ended up purchasing that with cash. Wow. And then fixing it up and stuff like that. And then in the meantime, here we are in Janesville, and my son-in-law and our daughter had just gotten married in Beloit right before we moved here. They ended up moving down the street from us. So as soon as they got there, we were like, let's do Juma. Juma's our Friday prayer, congregational prayers, and we would do it in their house. And then we knew a few Muslims from the area, and they would come, and that's how it started out. And I thought to myself, well, that's the way we'll do it until we fill the living room, and then we have to do something else. And it turned out, like within a year, I had done a talk about Islam and things like that, and then there was a guy that was there who was looking to get in contact with us. So I had traveled to Morocco, and I came back, and every place I would go to, the grocery store and places like that, I'd know somebody, and they'd say, there's this guy, he's looking for you. My wife was like, I don't know, we should be careful about that. And so finally, I got a hold of him, and we met at the library, and he had said that he wanted to help to start a group for, what do you call it, Muslim Friendship Group. And I said, well, that's great, let's do it here at the library. He said, no, I have a building I want to show you. And he wasn't trying to sell it. He wasn't trying to sell it to me. He was saying, let's buy it together. And then when he showed me the building, which is where we're at now, 200 South High Street in the 4th Ward area, it was actually originally built by the Knights of Columbus. And then it was used for many things through the years, men's shelter and the Boys and Girls Club and things like that. But it was a beautiful, like solid building with a parking lot and everything. I'm like, dude, that's awesome. And, again, so here I am, like, here's this wonderful place. How could we buy it? We talked to the seller, and he said he'd do a land contract. So it was awesome. And this all started, like, right before Ramadan. And by the end of Ramadan, we signed the papers. And so every Ramadan, when the time comes through, we're always so thankful that this place became available to us. So now for the center has been open for, I think, we're going on 9 years this year. So, and the work that we've been doing through there is really making ourselves available to the community to be able to answer questions and to share what Islam truly is about. And at the same time, we're reaching out to the community because there's Muslims around here. They just don't know that there's a masjid even still. And so we're putting the word out there still, and little by little. And then the other thing that we see as a phenomenon is that because we're so close to the interstate, there's truckers who come in, there's people traveling between Minnesota and Chicago and stuff. They find the masjid there. So we always have visitors that are coming through all the time. It's pretty awesome. So that's the center is there. The work that we call it a Dawah center. Dawah means invitation. It's like to share an invitation to the faith. And I wanted to call it a Dawah center because technically we use it as our masjid. Masjid is the Arabic word for mosque. Mosque is a French academic way of referring to it. But it's a place of prostration. That's what masjid means, place of prostration. So it's where we pray. But we also do many other things there. So I wanted to keep it as a type of center rather than specifically a masjid. So.
3 quick questions.
All right.
To make it very, very simple.
All right.
Okay, number 1. Who was Christ?
Yeah.
Was he a prophet? Was he a man? And how is he perceived?
Okay.
Question number 2.
Yeah.
Who's Muhammad? Was he a prophet?
Yeah.
Was he the author of the Quran? Question number 3. For non-believers,
Yeah.
do they go to hell, and is hell an eternal fire pit?
Okay.
3 simple answers.
Simple question. And I'll try to make them as simple as possible. So actually, I'm gonna have to ask you to help me out though with remembering each one of them. So the first one, so I can give it a proper.
Christ.
So
Christ
Jesus.
is perceived
Yeah.
as what by the Muslim
Yeah,
community?
so this is important because again, when I'm saying for myself in my journey, like I saw the oneness of God in the message of Islam, but I thought to myself, well, where does Jesus fit into that? And in the Quran, Jesus is actually mentioned more than Muhammad by name. And then, but what is our view? So it's a different view for sure. We believe that he's a prophet, and we believe that he gave the same message that all of the other prophets gave, and that is to believe in one God. We believe in the miracles. We also, first of all, we believe that he's the Messiah as well.
Yeah, risen from the dead.
No, Messiah being that he's the anointed one or the chosen one.
Do you believe he was risen from the dead?
So in the belief about the crucifixion and the ascension, we believe completely in the ascension, but the Quran says, they say and boast about Jesus, son of Mary, that they killed Christ, Jesus, but verily the likeness thereof was put before them, and what they say about it is based on conjecture. That's what the Quran says. So it says that somebody died on the cross, but it wasn't Jesus who died on the cross. The likeness thereof was put before them, meaning the people who were there all would have witnessed and testified that they saw Jesus hung that day. But what it's suggesting is that it actually was a case of mistaken identity. And for me, I had to wrangle with that because I was raised believing completely in Jesus and the crucifixion a whole bit. So I started thinking, wait a second though, the story of that event, like, the story is that they had the Last Supper, and there's a whole chapter in the Quran called The Table, which is about the Last Supper. And then there's this experience that happens in the garden where Jesus calls upon God. He's in his own area of the garden, and he calls upon God and he says, please do not forsake me and relieve the burden from me. He's calling on God. So I point that out because he's not calling on himself. He's calling upon the Creator, the God. And he himself is there saying, don't put me in this position, you know. And then there's this situation where Judas is out there and he's going to turn him in, right? And when he makes the deal with the people who he's going to turn them into, they say, this is all part of the Bible, they say to him, we don't know who we're looking for. So when we get there, you got to tell us who it is. Right? The guards who are going to get him don't know who they're going for. They don't even know who they're going to grab out of the group of people who are there. So to me, that means it is possible for a case of mistaken identity. It doesn't say clearly in the Quran who it is. There's no clear answer of exactly who it is. But what it says is that the likeness thereof was put before them. And then the next verse, though, says, but he ascended into the heavens. So as Muslims, we believe in the ascension of Jesus, that he went into the heavens. We also believe that he'll come back again, that there will be the second coming of Jesus. So we got a lot in common that we believe. But we do not, as Muslims, worship Jesus. We don't, for surely don't make him into a god. And we don't do the same with Muhammad. We look at him as a prophet. He brought a message, and we follow
Believe
him.
in the miracles and everything.
Up
Yeah.
to the point of the Last Supper.
Even the Last
The
Supper,
raising of the dead and
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah.
As a prophet, all of those things happen.
healing the leper. These things are mentioned actually in the Quran as well, that he
Okay.
did these miracles.
Right.
But how did he do those miracles? Again, he did it, God allowed for him to do these miracles.
Sure.
It was God's work through him that it was possible. So even to look at what is a miracle, my teacher said, a miracle is the breaking of norms. And we can witness miracles in our time, you know. But for Jesus, he did things that weren't normal. He healed people from diseases that people couldn't be healed from. He brought the dead to life.
Okay.
You know, he did things that were not normal. But he could only do that because God inspired that upon him,
Sure. Okay.
you know.
Muhammad's next.
And so Muhammad. So we don't deify or worship Muhammad at all, or any of the other prophets. And he brought a message, and the message that came to him was the Quran. And this is one of the amazing parts of this, is that he was an illiterate person. He couldn't read or write. He couldn't write his own name. And this literally later, when they would do agreements with people, he would have to have his cousin Ali write the thing for him, the contracts, and then he would just like put a mark on it. So he couldn't read or write, but he revealed a Quran, this recitation of 114 chapters of, in their language, in the Arabic language, it's the highest form of Arabic. And the people themselves would say, what is going on here? Is this guy a madman? Is he like, a soothsayer? Something happening like that? Or is he a poet? Is he a poet? How is he producing these works? And in the Quran, it's in the revelation itself, it challenges all mankind actually, and it says, produce even one of these ayats, one of these verses, just produce even one of them if you can. Like in the structure that it's put together and the rules of the language and everything like that. So it's said that God chose the language of Arabic to be able to give this message through Muhammad. And the way that it came to him was the angel Gabriel. would come to him. And the very beginning part of it talks about Muhammad would go out to this cave, Hira. This is a place, a cave called Hira, out away from Mecca. And he would do these fasts and things like that. And he was there, he was doing this, and the angel Gabriel came to him and said, recite. Ikra is the word in Arabic. And then Muhammad's like freaked out. Somebody's in this cave with me, and and I don't know, I can't. He was saying basically, I can't. I don't know what you want me to do. And then the angel embraced him and squeezed him until basically he surrendered, and then he began to repeat the words that he was saying to him. So some of, and this didn't all happen at once. So it was some verses came then, and then for the next 23 years, verses would continue to come. And so the revelation of the Quran came over that
Is
period
the
of time.
Quran an extension of the Old Testament, like our New Testament, or is it a replacement for?
So yeah, so the way that I look at it is like if you have a textbook base and then 101 and 102. So this is like the last version of all of them, because in it talks about stories from the previous revelations, and it affirms them even to great detail. In fact, one of the challenges that people brought to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there was a delegation of people that were sent from the Jewish nation, and they said, they had knowledge from their books that only a prophet would be able to affirm. They had details that nobody else would know. So they came and they wanted to give them this litmus test, so they asked about a specific story of some gentlemen who were in a cave. And there's the whole chapter is called Al-Kahf, the cave. And so what happened was the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he didn't know any of the details of that story whatsoever when they first came and asked. But up to this point, he had had other questions, and then the answers would come through revelation, like within a day or a few days or whatever. So he said, "I'll tell you tomorrow. Bide some time or whatever like that at least." But he was just reliant on if the answer is going to come, it's going to come through revelation. Well, a day went by, 2 days went by, 3 days went by, and he didn't receive revelation. He was like, is it done? I mean, and he wasn't going to just make something up. He didn't have an answer to give them. So they were waiting for this revelation. So when the revelation then started to come, it started with a story where he said, where God inspired he said, don't say about a thing that comes tomorrow unless you say, Insha'Allah, God willing. So this is a common thing that among Muslims we say, when we talk about something that's coming in the future, we say, Insha'Allah. It can happen. Our children, when we were raising our children, and they'd ask us, can we go do this? And we'd say, Insha'Allah. They'd say, never do it when you say Insha'Allah. So we became conscious of that, actually. We kind of tried to switch it up a little bit more. If we knew we were going to go, then we'd say, Insha'Allah, we're working on it. But so the revelation came. It started out with that lesson for the prophet to say, don't say something about tomorrow unless you give me recognition that is going to come to you. And so God willing, it did come. And then he gave the details of the story that they were asking about in more precise elements than they even had from themselves. And the interesting thing about it was that was the first part of the litmus test for them. It should have been, okay, he's the prophet. But then they asked him, and who is this message intended for? And he said, for all mankind. And they said, you're not a prophet. They left him. So there's as human beings, we have hang-ups sometimes. We miss the target because we walk away from it. And in that case, that's what happened for them. But the revelation came. It's still with us. We have all of those details about those men in that cave and how long they were there and everything. So it's pretty amazing, actually. So I'm not sure if I If that answers the question that you asked.
Yeah,
Okay.
we didn't get to hell
Oh, the hell. Yeah, so we believe in heaven and hell. Yeah, that's a part of the day of judgment, is to know that there will be a judgment and that there is a heaven and a hell. Now, what is a big lesson in Islam, in all the verses of the Quran, it starts out with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, meaning in the name of God, all merciful, most merciful, right? So, the reality of the day of judgment is that's what I'm banking on, is that God is merciful, right? There's many stories in Islam that tells that a person can live a life as a pious individual and get a handspan from death and die as a tyrant. And a person can live as a tyrant and get a handspan from death and die as a pious individual. So we don't have like a golden ticket as Muslims to say, for sure, we're getting to heaven, we're heaven people. We don't do that. We do what we can to try to fulfill our relationship with God in this life, and while we do that, it brings benefit to us in this life. And we have a hope that God's mercy will cover us when that final day comes. And that mercy will extend to everyone. God's mercy, so actually the Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, Rahmah is a mercy for everything. So oxygen comes from the trees, we all breathe it. That's a Rahmah from Allah. And then the Rahim of Allah is a mercy that is given to those who work to have that close relationship with God. It's a different type of mercy that's given to those who show that they have a want and a desire to be connected to God.
Yeah.
Too much?
No. And I'm sure that there's more questions, and so if you have a few extra moments to stay,
absolutely.
this has been amazing. As you can see, everyone is super interested in
Yeah.
learning, so thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for coming today to
Yeah.
join us. And then this is for you.
Oh, thank you.
This is from our Mission Sowers group. This is a thank you
Awesome.
for spending time with us
Yeah,
today.
thank
And there's
you.
a card in here too. So if you have questions and want, to ask, he said he's willing to stay. Otherwise, for respecting time, we did go over. So I thank you for being patient and listening. And again, if you wouldn't mind leaving those surveys for me before you go today, that would be great. Thank you so much.
And you're all invited actually to come to the center